This is the news on top of the hour.
Live from our studio in Georgetown.
Kaieteur Radio, 99.1 FM.
A pleasant good afternoon to you and welcome to your main newscast right here on Kaieteur Radio 99.1 and 99.5. I am Joshua Van Slyckman.
And I am Kayla King.
And just before we bring to you the top stories we're tracking in this bright Monday, let's bring to you today's front page comment titled, Time to End Abuse of Public Funds. The expenses the former minister in the Ministry of Public Infrastructure, Annette Ferguson, is alleged to have incurred on one trip may tempt one to believe that this was in relation to a return trip to the Far East. But Annette Ferguson only went to Wakenham, and that nearly $1 million was only for this visit. The expenses assault that should be the expenses assault, the senses that insult the dignity of all Guyanese. And if no Guyanese is disturbed by this level of extravagance, we at this newspaper, more so this radio station, are offended and outraged. We are sickened because we know where there is smoke, there is bound to be fire. And there may be many more similar circumstances involving others which are yet to be unearthed or which may never be known. It sets an unhealthy precedent, especially for the present ruling cabal, who may be tempted to believe that apart from approving contracts to firms owned by their children, they can engage in similar abuse of public funds. On every occasion that public officials, including elected officials, are allowed to escape sanction for financial extravagance, it means less will be available for policemen, our nurses, and our teachers. And now for the top stories we're tracking.
Spanish woman raped, sodomized, and battered as neighbors rushed to get help. She said perpetrator told her she'll be his 24th victim, and police felt close at her and released suspect. Gas to Shore project, using whales would be an act of lunacy, says Patterson. 5 months after Payara approval, government still hiding Allison, Red Fort report. Ram Karan tells Nadir to stop vulgarity in parliament, says media right to print heckling in its disgusting detail. Suriname will give preference to oil companies that teach them to operate blocks. Do stay tuned.
Digicel Prime Bundles just got better with 3 new apps. Watch more with PlayGo. Share more with Sportsmax. Read more news with Loop. Listen more with D-Music. Plus extra data. It's simply more bundled together. 51 gigabytes for 7 days for only $2,000. Live the experience with Digicel. Activate today on the My Digicel app.
Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. We open our main newscast with a very sad story as we tell you a 30-year-old Venezuelan mother was on Wednesday last raped, sodomized and battered as neighbors watch on in horror. Her 3 children, she said, are the reason she kept on fighting. Helpless, weak, traumatized and in severe pain, she called out for help, but patrol ranks tossed her clothes at her and released the suspect. As she sat down with our reporter and translated yesterday, she recounted being lured into a trap by a man for sex work, a man she now calls a quote-unquote a monster. Early on, she recalled being tossed on the bed while he took off the condom and went outside in a rage, returning with a knife. The man began raping and sodomizing her brutally at knife point. After a botched attempt at escaping, she recalled the man saying he will kill her, that she will be his 24th victim. The man reportedly slashed her across her body, and somehow she said the knife fell out of his hands and he resorted to crushing her head with a concrete block. She told reporters she managed to run a short distance, but the man jumped on top of her and began pounding her away mercilessly. According to a medical she showed us, the woman sustained a fractured rib along with multiple concussions to the head. There were also notable cuts and bruises to her body, along with multiple black and blue marks to her eyes, face, and neck. You can get the full details of this story in today's Kaieteur News.
In other news, government's proposed plan to land the gas-to-shore project at Wales would be considered an act of lunacy, says Shadow Oil and Gas Minister David Patterson. Patterson, during his contribution to the 2021 budget debates, reported that the coalition, when in the office, had conducted several studies pinpointing different sites for the project. Wales, he outlined, was one of the areas examined by a multi-stakeholder group and was not deemed viable, as it would involve placing the gas pipeline at the mouth of one of Guyana's busiest rivers. According to Patterson, the proposed 2023 timeline outlined by government for the project to be completed is hogwash if it's done within acceptable standards. Patterson added that supply of gas will be interpreted for at least 2 to 3 days yearly to support routine maintenance of the equipment.
And sticking with oil and gas, Minister of Natural Resources Vikram Bharat told Kaieteur News in August last year that after the Canadian consultant Alison Redford spearheaded a review of the Payara project, the finding will be made public. 2 weeks after he made the commitment, the Payara Field Development Plan was approved. The approval was announced on September 30th, 2020. The project is slated to come on stream in 2024, producing up to 220,000 barrels of oil a day. The government had published the Payara production license and the environmental permit, but not the findings of the team headed by the controversial Canadian consultant Alison Redford. It has been 5 months since that approval, and the public is still awaiting. Now, why should the findings of Redford's review be published? We tell you now that the review process was marred by the grave environmental concerns about the dumping of produced water into the ocean and the flaring of natural gas. Advocates for a better deal had urged government to withhold approval of the Payara to force the Stabroek Ventures, namely ExxonMobil, Hess and CNOOC, to give Guyana a renegotiated production sharing agreement with a bigger share of the revenue. Transparency Advocate beckoned the government to wait to develop its capacity to monitor and quickly audit the expenses. ExxonMobil had already claimed for recovery first.
And now let's tell you, former Speaker of the House Ralph Ramkaran said in his column Conversation 3 that the person holding the office has a duty to stop vulgarity by members of Parliament. The Speaker has a duty to stop the vulgarity, he said, and there are provisions in the standing orders to deal with members who violate the rules as to order by shouting across the aisle or making vulgar or otherwise offensive remarks even while sitting. This followed a week of vulgar, distasteful remarks by MPs during their budget speeches and in their heckling of their colleagues when budget debates opened last week. As the week went by, the racism, homophobia, and sexism in Member of Parliament's remarks began to abate as Kaieteur reported on it, and the public shamed them in newspapers, letters, speeches, as well as on social media. In response, the Speaker, Manzoor Nadir, warned the media about reporting on heckling and told the media that it opened itself to being sued. Ramkaran said that the press is absolutely right to bring this slow, decent vulgarity into the public domain and to print in its disgusting detail.
And sticking with the National Assembly, just in from the Artichon Convention Center, Speaker of the House Manzoor Nadir frequently interjected to enforce the rules of the National Assembly this morning. In the hour and a half, it's been an hour and a half since the budget debate started alone, and Nadir reprimanded several members of Parliament, namely Ganesh Mahipal, for heckling, Royce Ilford and Kwame McCoy for making an unproven claim about legitimacy of the government, and Frank Anthony for making a claim about elections officer Clement Mingo, who could not represent himself in the House. He also cautioned MP about shouting and screaming in their speeches. This comes after former Speaker Ralph Ramkaran wrote yesterday that Nadir has the duty to put an end to the vulgarity in Parliament.
Now let's tell you, governments around the world make big money when they award oil and gas contracts by open, competitive bidding processes. And that is the route the Suriname's government took when it announced in November 2020 that it has 8 oil blocks up for auction. When asked to give some insight on the bidding process, Rudolph Elias, the chief executive officer of Suriname's state oil company Staatsolie, revealed that it gives preference to those oil companies that propose to make it an operator in 10 years' time. He boasted that despite Staatsolie's strict fixed collections such as 6% royalty and 36% revenue collections and its 20% participating interest, the state oil company has seen a huge interest from international oil companies looking to secure the 8 blocks. And coming up after the break, relatives to take legal action against New Amsterdam Hospital after a woman unborn baby dies. Pastor dies in motorcycle bus collision. Understanding the draft local content policy part 9 proposed provisions do not allow full independence of regulator, and taking ERC's money for COVID relief and abuse of privilege, says ex-MP Sam Hines.
Weak systems of governance and the absence of the rule of law both combine to form the perfect stage for corruption to flourish. As part of our anti-corruption fight at Kaieteur Radio, we invite you to join us every Tuesday evening from 7:30 p.m. as we embark on a most needed quest to remove the tentacles of corruption from our systems. See you then for our latest program called Governance, Corruption and Justice.
A lot has happened since oil was discovered in 2015. The petroleum industry is an ever-changing web of oil, gas, politics, and money. It gets complicated sometimes, but we can bring you all the latest developments and include you in the discussions here on Kaieteur Radio. So tune in to 99.1 or 99.5 FM every Tuesday night at 20 hours for Petroleum 101. With me, your host, Kamal King. Kaieteur Radio, the radio with a difference.
Welcome back, and news just in from the Parliament. 13 government MPs walks out as Cathy Hughes takes podium. Just as Member of Parliament Catherine Hughes took the podium, 13 government MPs walked out of the dome at the Artichon Convention Centre this morning. These government MPs included the Minister of Health, Dr. Frank Anthony, who had just presented on the budget, Prime Minister Mark Phillips, Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs Anil Nandlal, Minister of Public Works Juan Edgell, and Junior Minister Minister of Public Works Juan Edgell and Deodat Indar, Junior Minister of Water and Housing Susan Rodriguez, MP Sanjeev Dattadin, Minister of Amber-Indian Affairs Pauline Sukai, among other government MPs. Notably, huge presentation comes on the heels of allegations which state that while she was the Minister of Telecommunication, a company owned by her, she had awarded $6 million in contract. In February 28th Kaieteur News article, it was exposed that the former minister had approved at least one payment to the company.
And now in other news, the New Amsterdam Hospital has once again come under fire after a woman and her baby died following a transfer from the institution to the Georgetown Public Hospital. Relatives have criticized the institution and the medical staff who attended to the pregnant woman, while noting their firm belief that some form of negligence must have taken place on the part of the hospital. Dead is Vanessa Sahario, 32, of Street Williamsburg, and her stillborn baby.
We tell you now that even though the draft local content policy categorically calls for the regulator of local content to be free from political interference, there are several conditions which hinder the objective from being fully realized or protected. According to the draft policy, one of the Petroleum Commission comes in stream. It will be tasked with implementing the document and its relevant regulations. It will be doing so through a dedicated local content secretariat. That body, however, would be overseen by an interagency coordinating committee. It would be made up of senior officials of the various government ministries and agencies that will be charged by the respective minister to oversee the implementation of the local content policy.
A West Coast Berbice man is now dead following an accident on the number 29 public road, West Coast Berbice. Dead is McKinley Farley, 48, of number 37 Village. It is understood that Farley, who was a pastor and also worked with the Guyana Sugar Corporation East Berbice operations, was riding his motorcycle in an easterly direction on the northern side of the highway when a minibus reportedly moving at a fast rate and proceeding most swerved into his lane while overtaking. Farley was struck and flung off of his motor vehicle.
After years of being absent from the political forefront and seldom making public commentary, former Prime Minister Sam Hinds is now lambasting the current members of the ERC for its malpractices, more specifically the abuse of public funds. This specifically relates to the commissioners who sought to grant themselves and ERC staff an excessive Christmas bonus of $150,000 and $100,000 respectively, which its chairman, Reverend John Smith, claimed was for COVID-19 relief. In a letter published in yesterday's edition of this newspaper, Hinds expressed great dissatisfaction with the commission that received a significant yearly allocation of funds to promote ethnic harmony and security in Guyana. Hinds said, and I quote, "I write this letter disclosing my difference, disagreement, disappointment, and dissatisfaction with our country's ERC with much." Hinds said, adding that he has refrained from commentary on the Commission's unjust spending, which was recently highlighted by Commissioner Roshan Khan and it conducted during the harrowing 5-month election saga. Former Prime Minister Samuel Hinds is one of the many senior figures in this country that are dissatisfied with the current ERC and believes that it is inadequately exercising its mandate.
Enough with the COVID-19 update. Coronavirus cases are now at 114.7 million, whereas deaths are at 2.5 million, and in the case of recoveries, 90.3 million. The Ministry of Health yesterday reported 35 new COVID-19 infections, 23 of which were recorded in Region 4. The other regions recording new infections were Regions 3, 5, and 10. The case toll increased to 8,585. 4 patients are in the COVID-19 intensive care unit, another 9 in institutional quarantine, 23 in institutional isolation, and 391 in home isolation. Additionally, a total of 7,972 persons have recovered to date, with 1 new recovery recorded yesterday. The COVID-19 death toll remains at 195 deaths.
And coming from international scene, according to CNN, the US FDA says that the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine met requirements for emergency use authorization. A committee will meet Friday on next steps. The coronavirus variants will likely drive a new wave of transmission in the US come spring, infectious disease expert says. The World Health Organization has reported a 6th consecutive week of declining global coronavirus. And just before we wrap things up here on your main newscast, let's head across to Parliament once more, where we tell you that Speaker of the House, the Honourable Manzoor Nadir, this morning reprimanded Opposition Member of Parliament Royce Ilford, Senior Counsel, for referring to the Irfan Ali administration as a quote-unquote illegitimate government. Nadir asked Ford that if he had any proof to support the label, or else he would have to rescind. Ford said that he did not have proof, but rescinded the legitimate label anyway. And with that, we've come to the end of your main newscast right here in Kaieteur Radio 99.1 and 99.5 FM. Let's remind you that you can get the full details of these stories and much more by picking up a copy of the Kaieteur News at a newsstand near you, or head across to our website at kaieteurnewsonline.com. I am Joshua Van Slackman.
And I am Kayla King.
Thank you for joining us.
Want value for your advertising dollar? Then place your ads on Kaieteur Radio's newscasts. Streamed live on 6 different mediums, reaching hundreds of thousands. Advertise today and watch your dollar grow. Call us on 225-8465 or 226-8210 today.
It is now 12 hours 19 in Guyana and right across the Eastern Caribbean. It is time for an excerpt from the Glenn Lal Show, after which we bring to you the National Outlook with GHK Lal.
Guyana is going somewhere, guys. This is what our leaders are saying. They are